Hello, everybody. I toast to you and all you do. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I'm having lighting issues between my glasses and the windows and whatever. Just don't pay attention to the shadows. So, the full moon is coming up, and that is a video I'm going to make as well. And I know this one is coming up also kind of late. I have had a very strong voice telling me again and again to make the video that I'm making right now. But it's been an intimidating video to sit down and make. There is so much public shaming and divisions and issues coming out based around COVID. And I think that a lot of people are terrified to share their own experiences, their own opinions. And so I am going to share an anecdotal record. This is my own experience with COVID. This isn't about what's right or wrong or left or right or do I believe in COVID or not. It's none of those things. This isn't a political video. This is this is my story, I guess, with COVID and how it has affected my life and how it has affected my family's health and all of those different things, because this isn't something that we should be shaming. This isn't another... This has become one of those things that the government and communities, groups of people, different opinions, have all really colored our experience and also created a lot of unrest. So I think that it's important for us to share our experiences with COVID because chances are you've probably had it. It's probably affected your life in some way, whether or not you've had it. And instead of shaming each other or feeling like we should be ashamed or like we can't say anything, it's important for us to talk about this because the only way that we can move forward in this situation is to talk about it, learn about it, grow from this experience, and build a better tomorrow that is ready for these kind of situations. Whether we want to believe it or not, viruses are mutating every day all over the world between animals and people and blah, 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 and in labs and all of the places that these things are happening. And I think that it's funny that right as the COVID virus started back in 2019, there was a documentary on Netflix that came out talking about viruses and about how they mutate and about how an outbreak could happen. And then it was just like, and then, so somebody sitting over there at Netflix was like, I have my intuition that says this is going to happen. Let's focus on this. And kudos to that person. I don't know who made it. I can't even remember what it's called. I know it's a Netflix documentary. It's probably called Contagion or Outbreak or something like that. It's probably been taken down because of censoring. It's a crazy world out there right now. And again, the censoring is another part of the problem, is that people don't feel like they can express their opinions or their experiences without in some way being informed, like, oh, that's misinformation. I'm like, no, this is my real experience. This is what happened to me. And here's how it played out in my life. And then that becomes misinformation. Or you have the people who are like, oh, you're so wrong. Whatever. That's not what this is here for. Like I said, if we can't share it and talk about it and learn from this experience, then it will repeat itself again and again and again. And you can look back in history. This happens all the time. Anytime something is hushed and shushed and made into the demon, it comes back again and again and again. So, with all that rambling, now I gotta grab a blanket and I'll tell the story. Hold on. Okay. It's like 20 degrees outside. I think that's going to be the high today. It's freezing. Anyways, so my experience with COVID. I remember the first time I saw it on the news, it was in, I think, December of 2019, and they were talking about Beijing, or about China being shut down because of some anomalous virus, or, some weird virus. And I remember watching the news thing. My husband changed the channel. I was like, wait, I want to watch that. And he's like, oh, that doesn't affect us. It's happening in China. And so that moment really stuck in my brain. And then we, in January, went to a birthday party at this crazy kid place. One with tunnels and slides and jumpy castles and trampolines. And it was crazy. There were hundreds and hundreds of kids all over the place. And the next week, we all got very, very, very sick. And my son started first, and he was sick for almost 2 months. He went to the emergency room. We went to urgent care. We saw his doctor. I've never had someone from urgent care call me back and be like, hey, is everything okay? And this was before they were big on the COVID, and we didn't have the testing. And so he was tested for RSV and flu and strep and all kinds of, whooping cough. He was tested for everything because he was sick, and he was sick for a long time. And so he missed 2 months of school. And it was funny because the doctor, he got an ear infection. He got conjunctivitis. He got, just all of the sicknesses that you could think just kept coming. And his body was just didn't know how to handle it. And so I remember the doctor's note after we took him for the ear infection. And they said, here's the antibiotics. The ear infection will go away. He should be good to go. And they were like, he can go back to school this many days after, just the normal routine that you get from a doctor after you've been on antibiotics. So after we went through that and he was on the antibiotics, I took him back to the school. I said, hey, he's done with his antibiotics. The ear infection is gone. The doctor says that I can bring him back. But clearly, as we're standing there and he just coughs and coughs and coughs, he can't stop coughing. I was like, I don't know if you want me to bring him back. He is clearly still sick. There's something going on. We've had him tested for everything. The doctors say he's not contagious. They say he's already gone through all of this, all of the things that would make him contagious. He's already been through that. And now he's just working out this cough or something. And like I said, this was in January and February of 2020. So it was really early in the pandemic. It was before they started shutting everything down. And he was never actually tested then. But through a series of elimination, we literally had him tested for everything else that it could have been. And even at one point, the urgent care doctor was like, well, we'll test him for all of these random other things. Let's do some blood work, which sucks for a 6-year-old to have to get blood drawn and go through all of that. And none of their tests came back positive. And like I said, this is the only time I've had somebody from the urgent care call me back and be like, hey, by the way, how's your kid doing? Is everything okay? And it's a weird situation. It's just, he wasn't miserable. He didn't have a high fever. He just had this horrible cough. Now, my oldest daughter and my daughters, actually, both of them, got a high fever. I almost took my older daughter to the emergency room. I'm checking on her in the middle of the night and keeping ice packs in her bed. Her fever was up to 104. She's on ibuprofen and Tylenol. We're double dosing her to keep that down. And she just for 24 hours had this really high fever, terrifyingly high. Like we got to keep your head wet. We got to do all of these things. Otherwise, I have to take you to the emergency room. It was terrifying. But it only lasted for 24 hours. And then that was it. She didn't get a cough. She didn't get any of the other symptoms. She just got that. And my youngest one got a fever, maybe 102, and a little bit of a cough. And then it went away. I got super, super sick. I don't normally get sick after working in daycare for 15, 20 years. I've had all of those snotty nosed viruses that you can imagine. And so I normally don't get sick. Like, I'm pretty immune to strep and the flu and all of that kind of stuff. But I got super sick. I was sick for like a whole week. I was not able to, like, I was just exhausting. Walking up and down the stairs was exhausting. And everything smelled like vomit. Like, no joke. Like, fresh throw up. That was like, I would like, oh, I can breathe out of my nose. Oh, I would rather have a stuffy nose almost, because everything just smelled like vomit. It was disgustingly horrible. My husband also got super sick from it. And he was sick for a whole week. It was also, I mean, it was just horrible for him. He's same kind of symptoms. He did not lose his taste or smell. But his symptoms became much different in that his kidney began to shut down. He was having a lot of pain. He thought he maybe had a bladder infection or something like that. He's got other digestive issues. So at first it was just whatever, but he was getting really severe pain. And then one night, it was in April, he woke up out of bed in excruciating pain. And so I had to rush him to the emergency room. And when they got in there, I guess his kidney was 3 times the size. I mean, like, you look at the picture and here's one kidney, and then the other kidney is like this, his CT scan. And it's crazy. His kidney was huge and it was super inflamed. He had a very large kidney stone that was lodged in the tube between your kidney and your bladder, and he had to have emergency surgery. It was also terrifying. And this, I remember, was like the week of lockdown, because they wouldn't let us, or like they let us stay in the hospital the first day. I was able to come back the next day with the kids and see him. But then after that, we could not come back and visit him anymore. And this was like a super disruptive situation for my husband. Obviously had to have surgery. Luckily, it's a minor surgery. And I'll never forget, the doctor was like, well, we're going to use this sound laser. We're going to blast it out of there. I was just like, there are some things that people just don't grow out of. But it was a weird situation to be in, and that's when they were shutting things down. The kids were off from spring break and ended up not going back to school because of COVID. And so as everything was coming out on the news and they were talking about all of the different things about people with COVID dying from kidney failure and it doing damage to your organs and all of these different things, the doctor came out, he says, well, have you been tested for COVID? And we're like, no, because, it wasn't even a thing. And obviously at that point, it was 2 months after we had COVID. I still, the throw up smell dissipated from everything to just laundry soap. And so for probably about 9 months, felt like all of my clothes, I would rewash laundry. I rewashed all of the clothes in the closet like a crazy person. And I would like ask my husband or my sister, and people would be like, wait, before we leave the house, can you smell my shirt? Does it smell like vomit, or is that just me? And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I felt crazy. And I was like, well, it is what it is. Like, and so even though we were never tested because it was so early in the virus transmission, every craziness, looking back, we know that we had COVID. Unfortunately, by the time they had all of the testing, even the antibody testing, it was almost a year after we had it, which by that point, your body's not actively making those antibodies. So unless I was introduced to it yet again and all of that scientific-y stuff, then, so those tests all came back negative. So we went through the whole quarantine thing. I would not do the home online schooling through the school, like where they remote learning. So we actually pulled the kids out of school and did homeschooling for a year. And the one experience that I learned from that is school is really about being able to fill out those papers and take the tests and all of that stuff. So however, like my son who was in first grade, he did homeschooling for first grade. He was doing the reading. He was up to the reading level. We were doing the spelling tests, and he's doing those kind of things at home. We just didn't have that standardized reading test. So he didn't really learn how to take those tests. And he didn't. So the first time when he went back in second grade and was able to go back to school, and he took that first test, he failed the test miserably, not because he didn't know the words or wasn't able to read it, but because he didn't know how to take the test. So as a parent, and my advice to parents out there everywhere, keep in mind that a lot of school is about learning to take that test. So it's important to teach your kids the skills of taking tests. And that's such a sad thing to say. Like, I'm not even going to lie. Like, I have to tell my daughter all the time on her math test specifically because she can just do the math in her head. And I'm like, I don't care if you can do the math in your head. And before I even give you all the numbers, like you psychically know the answer, you still have to show your work. And how did you get to that answer? And it's frustrating for her. But it is what it is. Like, she loses a lot of points on her test because she doesn't show that work. So this year has been a lot about, you have to learn how to take these tests. You have to learn how to understand the way that they're asking this. They teach math in like 5 different ways now. My son's doing 10 count or whatever, where they draw little lines and dots and squares and whatever. And I'm just like, he's like, I got to show my work. And I'm like, I don't understand what all of this is. And then he tells me, I'm like, oh, okay, well, we got this. But so through the homeschooling process, we learned that. I think the kids got a lot of like science and exploration, and there was a lot of really good learning that they got. They just didn't take the tests. So it was hard to get back into that groove. So while we were out on that, my husband like went through some other medical things. Like, we found out he was lactose intolerant, which he was not before we had COVID, which was just a weird thing to have. Like I said, it took about 9 months for my smell to come back to normal. And then I'm trying to think of when the date was, because it was last year. I want to say it was probably June of 2021. We got COVID again. And everybody's super sick. My sister got tested. She tested positive, which was funny because she sent me the results. And she's like, I don't know how to read these results because they are not... I mean, like, it says, oh, hey, yeah, you tested positive for COVID, but by the way, we didn't test you for all of this other stuff, so you don't have all of these other diseases. Like, we didn't test you, so we can't say that you don't have all of these other symptoms. And it was like the positive result was like hidden into the message, and I think they do that on purpose to make you uneasy about the whole situation. And we quarantined, and we did what we had to do. My husband's coworkers all had it. It was again, it went around and we all got it. Now, my husband is vaccinated. He has the boosters. He was super sick. I mean, like, fatigued and sinus and kind of infection, body aches, and a headache after all of the vaccine boosters and shots that he got. And so now that they're like, oh, hey, you need to get another booster, he's like, I'm not doing that. It's not like, that was miserable. He was down for a week after each vaccine because his body was, and some of the new science shows that people who have already had COVID don't necessarily take up the vaccines very well. So we kind of, again, deduced, like, well, that's probably why. So this last couple weeks ago, we got COVID again. My husband, by the time he went in and got his test, he was already past the point of testing positive, so his test came back negative. But my son, who I actually took to get a strep test because his tonsils were swollen, it came back for COVID. So I was like, okay, well, we got to quarantine again. And it's just the whole situation is just so wonky to me, I guess is a good way to put it. Like, not all of the tests come back accurate. Not everybody has the same rules. So the doctor said, okay, 5 days from his last fever, which he had already was past the fever when we went and got him the COVID test. This time, I guess so. Our symptoms for my husband and I were like a severe flu, like 2 days of a moderate fever, stuffy nose, headache, body aches, fatigue. And we're like, okay, well, this is probably COVID. When my husband had to go back to work, he went and tested, and they tested, like I said, he tested negative, but he was already past the point of the fever, and so on and so forth. Then my kids all got it. The littlest one, she got like a runny nose, and you could tell she was just a little run down. Her eyes were a little sunken in, like she hadn't slept, even though she was sleeping a lot. So I just knew that she wasn't feeling very well. But no fever, no cough. We all got a mild cough, sticky mucus. It was funny when the doctor was like, well, you're done being contagious after this many days of the fever and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, well, I'm still blowing out lime green snot. I mean, excuse the grossness, but that's, so clearly there's still something being worked out in my body. I feel like I'm probably still contagious. But again, they don't know. They can't. We're so early in the situation that it's hard to say when or when not and this and that. And everybody's body is different. You've got people who are long haulers who are having COVID symptoms for months and months and months, and other people who are not. Now, for this last round, like I said, my husband and I had the yucky nose and fever and whatnot. My daughter and my son both got my oldest daughter, both got super high fevers. Again, my daughter, 103.9. I'm like, oh my goodness, if this goes up much more, I'm taking you to the emergency room. We're wetting her hair down. We're keeping her body cool. I'm like, you can't be under the blanket. You can maybe use this little sheet. Let's put some shorts on. Like, you need to cool your body down. Terrifying to have your kid with that high of a fever. My son also, who doesn't normally get a high fever, got a super high fever, and it lasted for about 2 days. Then once they both felt better, my son, it was 48 hours after his fever. No, 48 hours after his fever was gone. His tonsils were swollen, and he's like, Mom, I can't swallow. It hurts to eat his breakfast. I said, well, you can't go to school today. I'll take you to get a test for strep or whatever, and we'll get this figured out. I actually sent my daughter back to school. She was 48 hours past her fever. No other symptoms, just a high fever. So, when I talked to the school, they said, yeah, bring her back. It's fine. So we went, I tested my son. He came back positive for COVID. Took forever. Not because, the lines were long, just because you sit there and wait for the test results. It's not really rapid. Fortunately, the urgent care that we go to has a testing facility right there. And so we are able to get those results back really fast, which is the one nice thing about it. But I said, well, we're getting him a strep test. Here's the symptoms. And the doctor's like, yeah, we'll do the strep test. And then the nurse, she's like, well, do you want to get him tested for COVID too while you're here? And I said, yeah, we better do that just so that I can get him back to school with no problem. Because sometimes the schools do ask for a negative COVID result. Not so much anymore, but earlier in the semester, they were doing that. So let's just do that while we're here. We'll get it out of the way and be done. And so they come back in the room, 20 minutes, 30 minutes later. Well, he doesn't have strep, but he does have COVID. I was like, oh, okay, so now what? And she looked at his throat, and she looked in his ears, and she listened to his chest and everything. And she says, well, the throat looks like just some minimal swelling. Give him some ibuprofen if it's really, some Motrin, if it's really bothering him. When was his fever? All of those kind of general questions. And then she said, okay, she did the math. She said, okay, he can go back to school on Friday. This was on Tuesday. He can go back to school on Friday because his fever's been gone this long and blah, blah, blah. He'll be good. I'm like, okay. So I got to the school. The school says, well, he can't come back till Tuesday. And I'm like, well, I got a doctor's note, and it says he can come back. No, the school policy is this. At first, they told me I didn't even have to pull my daughter out because that's why I called them. I said, well, I should come and get my daughter. And the first person I talked to was like, no, I don't think you have to if she's not sick. But I'll transfer you. They have a COVID nurse. So they transfer me to a COVID nurse. And She's like, well, because she had the fever over the weekend, we're going to, why don't you just take her as a precaution? Blah, blah, blah. And she says they can come back on Tuesday if they're feeling better, but we have had some kids who've come back and they're still really tired, so we send them home. I'm not trying to make a judgment call in that statement. I'm just trying to point out the tremendous amount of mixed messages that we receive, and having to make those choices for yourself based off of your beliefs and the information that you have. And unfortunately, we don't get all of this information. That's why I'm making this video, because I think it's important for people to hear other people's stories. When we got COVID this time, we all got together on Christmas. Nobody was sick. Everybody felt fine. So then my husband and my grandma got sick. And ironically, they're the two vaccinated people. My stepdad and I then got sick next. My mom and my other sister, my mom got sick next, and my sister got a little tiny stuffy nose or whatever. And my brother didn't get sick at all. So now I make fun of him. Like, you're the asymptomatic carrier. Because there are those people walking around who don't get any symptoms. They don't get sick. They carry it or whatever. And we don't know. But, I call my grandma every day while she was sick because she's been terrified of getting COVID. When she called her doctor, unfortunately, her doctor wouldn't even see her. She's not immobile, but she doesn't drive and she doesn't have transportation. And it's difficult for her to get out of her house, but she still wanted to go see her doctor because she had a chest cold and she didn't feel good and she wanted to see her doctor. Unfortunately, her doctor wouldn't see her. He said, go to the emergency room. And she doesn't want to pay for an ambulance to go to an emergency room and not have control over the emergency room that the ambulance takes her and not be able to talk to a doctor that she knows and trusts. And so, of course, she didn't. They prescribed her some cough medicine without even seeing her, which I'm just, again, highlighting some of the problems that are arising out of this situation. And she's feeling better now. She came through and everything. She and I discussed she's like, well, I don't know how I feel about taking this cough medicine because it's a cough suppressant. And I really have mucus in my chest I'm trying to work out. And she's, obviously older and she has a more traditional view of medicine. And so she she's like, I need to cough this stuff out. And I said, well, maybe just take it at night while you're trying to sleep so that your body can rest. And then in the daytime, you can try to work it out unless it's really hurting your lungs. Because she has broke her lungs before when she's been sick in the past, coughing so hard. So, take your calcium supplements, make sure you're eating your spinach, do all of those things to help take care of yourself. When you get old, there's no going back. So after Wyatt tested positive and my mom tested, I don't know if she got tested. Probably not, maybe. Anyways, after people tested positive for COVID, I called my grandma. I'm like, well, how are you feeling? And she's like, I'm feeling much better. I have a little bit of a residual cough, but I feel better. And I said, well, good thing. Be proud, Grandma, because you survived COVID. She's like, what? And I told her what happened with Wyatt, my son, and my husband and everything. And she was quiet for a minute. And she's like, well, I don't really know if that's what I had. I said, Grandma, for so long you've been so scared of not surviving having COVID. I'm telling you that Wyatt tested positive for COVID. Statistically, the chances that we all had the similar symptoms, at least all of the grown-ups had very similar symptoms, and the time frame that, it was within 5 days of our Christmas vacation and then Christmas gathering and then shortly thereafter. And it just kind of trickled through. I'm going to say that you just had COVID. And again, she was quiet for a minute. I said, Grandma, you just don't have to be scared anymore. You did survive this, because I know that there are a lot of people who did not survive because they were alone and they didn't think that they were going to survive, and it was that overwhelming. Personally, I lost a great-grandparent through all of this, the isolation, and then because he and my grandmother were isolated and didn't have the support that they had before his condition worsened, and they're in their 90s. So she couldn't take care of him. So they had to have him put into a home where they could help him. And because he was isolated there and by himself, dementia set in pretty much right away, which was the saddest kind of situation. And I kept telling my grandma, I said, well, let me go visit him. And she said, they won't let anybody in there to visit him. You can call him on the phone. But because his dementia had set in, like, he would tell my grandma things like, I'm at the filling station and come pick me up. Or, I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. What's going on? Like, it was very, very upsetting. In the end, he actually had a prosthetic leg. He ended up throwing his leg at a nurse because he didn't want to take the medicines that they were giving him, and he didn't want to be there, and he wanted to go home. So he threw his prosthetic leg at a nurse, which is a funny kind of whatever. But unfortunately, the hospital then transferred him to an even further away hospital, very far away. And when he got there, he called his wife. He said, the police just dropped me off at this gas station. I need you to come pick me up right now. And that's very devastating. I know that there's a lot of family guilt because there was no one that could visit him. And it then took... excuse me for that. It's upsetting. There is a lot of family upsetness because nobody was able to visit him in his last moments. There is... and then his funeral was postponed for almost a whole year because everybody, because of COVID and lockdowns and all of that stuff. So on the other side of the family, I had another great-grandmother who passed on. Her situation was less sad. I think that she just got to the point where she was like, I'm over this, I'm done. She was also in her 90s, and she just decided she was going to stop eating. Sorry, the small child. She knows that Mom's upset downstairs. No, it's okay. So I think that there's been a lot of loss. There's been a lot of struggle. There's been a lot of trying to figure out how to cope and deal and make your own choices, and a lot of shaming. And as that happens, it makes it harder to process these. So instead of shaming each other, I think we should all share our stories and let people know that they're not alone. I thought, I talked to my sister yesterday, and she says, oh, we had COVID last week. She lives in Washington. And I was like, oh, that's funny. We had COVID last week too. We don't even see each other. It's crazy. So I had a friend in New York who also had COVID last week because it's that everywhere. So I guess the big takeaway is just, instead of shaming each other, instead of judging and all of that stuff, let's share our stories. Let's just be honest and open, and we can help each other get through this and survive and rise above and do all of that stuff. So without further ado, I toast to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video. Let people know that they're not alone and that you don't have to be shamed. Like,